Asked Javier Manjarres of shark-tank.com to hang around. He's here in studio with us. Also, Newsmax New York, Rick Ungar. Very nice to stay in the chair. Rick, let's begin with you.
We're having so much fun. We're sticking around.
Well, we're happy to have you.
We're smiling.
That's right. And, well, of course, Dwight Eisenhower said that a leader should always be optimistic. But, Rick, these are some troubled times internationally. We just heard the Israeli ambassador talk about what is transpiring in his home country. What is your take now in the wake of what is apparently a revenge killing there in Israel?
Well, it's a shame. I very much agree with what the Israeli ambassador said. The distinction here is that the people who did this on the Israeli side have been caught and if convicted, will be punished, were in the streets when it happened there. So I think the difference has become clear. It's a terrible It's a terrible thing, but we have to all remember this is sadly not the first time we've seen acts. Certainly will not be the last time.
Javier, your take.
Look, nothing's going to happen here. I think the Israeli government is going to be handcuffed again by the Obama administration. The Obama administration, they need to let the Israelis do what they do best. Look, I'm one that agrees with Sarah Palin. Let Allah sort it all out. Let Israel do what they Allah sort it all out. Let Israel do what they have to do. These people do not know anything more than violence, and this is how they operate. So, look, Israeli is best inclined to do things here. They know how to do work with these terrorists because that's all they are. The government is this unity government. All it is just a Hamas front. It's a terrorist front, and they need to be dealt with accordingly. Nothing's going to change.
Rick, we take a look at Israeli politics, and while we lament a lot of, people say we're polarized in the United States, there's a fair amount of polarization in domestic politics in Israel. But Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially says the Israeli criminal justice system is going to deal with this. Do you believe him on that count?
Oh, I do, and I'm really glad you brought that up, JD. To speak to something Javier said. We can argue over whether or not the United States is doing enough for Israel with this administration. We all know there hasn't been the best of relationships between Netanyahu and Obama. But to suggest that we handcuff Israel would be to suggest that you don't understand Israel. The only thing that can handcuff an Israeli government is what JD just alluded to, which is their own fractious domestic politics. We don't handcuff Israel. Believe me, nobody handcuffs Israel except for their own people.
But mindful of that, Rick, let me turn to Javier, because the new White House press secretary, Josh Earnest, in the wake of the discovery of the bodies of the 3 Israeli teens, specifically called on restraint from Israel. Was that a wise move diplomatically?
That's what I mean. That's how they handcuff Israel. Israel's going to do what they're going to do. And hopefully they will follow through with what Netanyahu always says. But the way the Obama administration handcuffs Israel is these subtle threats. So listen, please don't do this. We implore you not to restrain. That's pretty much telling you, hey, by the way, we do give you billions of dollars of aid every year. So, hey, we have a say in this.
That's kind of inconsistent, Javier. On the one hand, you're saying that we're handcuffing them, and then you correctly say Israel's going to do what they're going to do.
I said that prior. I said Israel's
I'm not doing what they're going to do.
Israel's going to do what they're going to do, but again, they are being handcuffed by the Obama administration with these subtle threats. That's what they are. They're subtle threats.
First of all, it wasn't a subtle threat. Calling for restraint is something that every
that is a subtle threat. However you want to look at it, listen, amigo.
I'll tell you what. I'll make you an on-air bet. Okay, dinner in New York or in Florida, whoever wins. Dinner. If we see $1 less of foreign aid going to Israel at any time in the remainder of the Obama administration, $1 less. I'll buy you more. If not, you buy me.
I can bet that there'll be more dollars going to Israel. It's not going to change.
I can too. So I'm not quite sure how you're saying that's a threat.
Well, we can talk, Rick. We mentioned it the last time that you gentlemen joined us. The story came out, I believe it was the initial face-to-face between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama. The president excused himself from the meeting, went upstairs to the family quarters, had dinner, and essentially left the leader of one of our strongest allies cooling his heels downstairs. Now, atmospherically, whether that means anything in terms of money or cash on the barrelhead in terms of foreign policy, that would have a chilling effect, would it not?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, I should say this. I've been told by people much closer to the situation it didn't happen quite that way. But let's pretend that it did. The relationship between Israel and the United States well exceeds whatever bad feelings there are between the current president of the United States and the current prime minister of Israel. To think otherwise is silly. If Obama did that, I agree with you, rude, not something I would have done. But I promise you that our long-term interest will not be affected by not inviting the prime minister up to the House for a bite.
Well, we've invited someone else in.
The real world.
We've invited someone else in on the conversation, and join us via telephone, Alan Dershowitz, the noted criminal defense attorney. Alan, two topics intersecting this morning as you join with Javier Manjarres and Rick Ungar with us in our discussion. And Alan, we're talking about what transpired, what is widely reported to be thought of as a revenge killing of an Arab teen in the wake of the murder of the three Israeli youths. What is your take on the situation unfolding right now between Israel and the Palestinian Authority?
Well, there's never any justification for any kind of revenge killing. Revenge killings, vigilante killings are completely inconsistent with the values of the Israeli government. They are not inconsistent, however, with the values of Hamas. Just today's New York Times headline says Hamas vows revenge for the killing of 6 of its combatants. And what they're threatening to do is bomb a city, Beersheba. And so what we see is Hamas and many Palestinian leaders thinking revenge killings are completely justified. Of course, now they're complaining about this revenge killing, as well they should. There's no excuse for revenge. But they're applying a double standard. They say revenge is okay for Hamas. It's okay for Hamas to kill civilians, as they often have done, in revenge for Israel taking military action against combatants who are entitled to be killed under the laws of law and the rules of law and morality. And so there's an asymmetry. The reason this is a headline, the reason the New York Times has big headline today talking about the revenge killing, and also a picture of the young Palestinian American who was improperly beaten up by the Israeli police, is that the world expects much more of Israel than they do of Hamas. And that double standard is a form of racism. What it says is we don't expect as much from Arabs and Muslims as we do from Israelis and Jews. And that form of double standard is what creates what's called this cycle of violence. It isn't a cycle of violence. It's Israel taking military actions which are legitimate, and then Palestinian leaders and Hamas using human shields and attacking civilians and killing civilians. That's not a cycle of violence. That's a one-way approach to violence. So I think the world has to begin to apply a single standard and not a double standard to Israel.
So, Alan, you have in the courtroom shown great ability to have a jury take another look at the evidence and consider everything. Mm-hmm. In the courtroom of international opinion, what has to happen for this double standard to go away? We've got about a minute and a half left.
Well, first of all, I would refuse to accept the jury of the international community, which has always applied a double standard to Israel, which imposes divestment, boycott, and sanctions against Israel, but not against Cuba or China or Russia or anybody else. So I wouldn't accept the jury. What has to happen is the truth has to be told repeatedly, that this is not an equally moral claim on both sides, that the Israelis are defending their citizens through generally legitimate means, sometimes excessive force, like in this case against the Palestinians, and Hamas and other Palestinian groups deliberately target civilians, deliberately use torture, deliberately use kidnappings, and there's an asymmetry there, and the world has to recognize that.
Alan Dershowitz, we appreciate your comments. As we thank Rick Ungar and Javier Manjarres here, could you stay, Professor Dershowitz,
Sure.
through the break? Because we'd like to get some more comments from you if we could.
Sure, happy to do it.
Great. Rick and Javier, we thank you for hanging in. We hope you will stay with us as we have more of our conversation with Alan Dershowitz, and we'd like your thoughts on what is transpiring in Israel. Is there a double standard internationally, as the professor says? Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. We also have email, connect@newsmaxtv.com, and don't forget Facebook. America's Forum continues after this timeout.